Machine learning is going to continue to improve the lives of truck drivers.
Using computer vision and machine learning, we wanted to see if we could create an automatic analysis of autism and autism spectrum disorder.
Machine learning allows us to get very, very quickly to very complex data.
Machine learning can actually directly contribute to understanding our planet.
We can use machine learning and computer vision analysis to assess things like facial expression and attention. And so we built a set of movies that elicit these behaviors and use the camera in the device to measure the child's response.
AWS is allowing us to go through the machine learning phase together, and we can now predict future performance based on the data of the past.
The innovation that Convoy has brought is we can figure out where the right truck is for the right load anywhere in the country, and using machine learning match the right trucker at the right price to move a shipment from point A to point B.
We sail around Antarctica in 196 days with 3 vehicles. You will need to understand the risk of collision with icebergs, which can be the size of small countries. Drones are equipped with cameras. The problem being, when you're at sea, the ocean moves, the waves move, and we need to train machine learning algorithms so we can navigate it. How do we use the technology that we have developed and put it at the service of the planet?
We're embracing machine learning. We're embracing AI. We're going to truly change the game.
I'd like to have home time because I don't get a lot of time at home. But that's what the Convoy app does for me. It helps me be at home more.
If we can do just a small thing to change one kid, I think I would go to sleep with a smile.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I'm honored to kick off today's AI for Mission Readiness breakout session. I would like to welcome Amazon Web Services to introduce today's panel.
Hi, this is Cedric George, Director, Department of Defense Strategic Business Development at Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services is proud to sponsor the AFCEA DC AI/ML Technology Summit, building upon 20 years of Amazon's machine learning innovation in areas such as logistics and fulfillment, computer vision and robotics, forecasting and supply chain optimization. AWS offers the broadest and deepest set of machine learning services supporting cloud infrastructure for mission and business needs and subject matter expertise. Our goal, simply put, is putting machine learning in the hands of every developer, data scientist, and expert practitioner. Named a leader in Gartner's Cloud AI Developer Magic Quadrant, AWS is helping tens of thousands of customers, including in the defense and intelligence communities, accelerate their machine learning journeys. I am honored to kick off today's AI for Mission Readiness discussion by introducing our panelists. First, Mr. Terrence Bush is the Mars Technical Director with the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mr. Bush is one of DIA's leading geospatial subject matter experts focused on applying GeoINT-based solutions to all source analysis. Joining him is my fellow airman, Captain Michael Kanan, the enterprise lead for AI/ML for the United States Air Force. Captain Kanan directs all AI activities on the behalf of the Deputy Director for Air Force Intelligence. Finally, Mr. Michael Matson, Deputy Director and Director of Strategic Engagement at the Defense Innovation Unit. Before joining DIU, Mike was the Executive Director for the Section 809 Congressional Advisory Panel on streamlining acquisition, providing the intellectual underpinnings for acquisition reform language in the defense authorization statutes. Moderating today's panel is Troy Snyder, General Manager, Public Sector 360. Would you please join me in welcoming our panel guests?
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here this afternoon to help lead this conversation with three really insightful gentlemen from the defense community. And as you know, the focus is on mission-driven AI and trying to figure out how to take this concept that's been something of a buzzword for the last few years and translate it into real mission effectiveness across the defense establishment and across government. And so I want to let each of our speakers set the table a little bit and tell us about the work that they're doing. And Terrence, let's start with you. If you can tell us a little bit about what the Mars system is and the work you're doing and where you think we should be focusing this conversation.
Sure, thanks. Thank you for having me today. Mars is a machine-assisted analytic rapid repository system. It's a large name, but really what it's all about is providing foundational military intelligence to the warfighter. We have done this as DI's doctrinal mission for decades. The system that we use for this is becoming a little long in the tooth and a little brittle, and it's time to re-envision that system. And we're re-envisioning that system at a time, an era where we're at the precipice of AI. So as we develop Mars, we're not just delivering to a warfighter in old, outdated modalities, but in these new modalities, right? At high rates of speed, high volumes of information coming and going in this amazing bisynchronous rates. And it's not just going to the human being. We are feeding other sensors. We are feeding other machines. And so a lot of what we do in Mars is think about the targeter or the operator or the strategist, but we also think about the AI. We also think about the machine. We think about those realms that we are going to feed and we are currently feeding today. And that's pretty much at the root of what Mars is about.
Okay, and we will come back to the question, but is there anything that you think we should really focus on in particular today in terms of how to go from concept to application?
Yes, I do. I think really a lot of this is, and we'll get into the fact that how much data underpins everything that we're doing. But there's also the how to get to acceptance, how to get AI from a desire state into an applied state. And we've done some of that at DIA, and I'm proud to say that I've been involved with some of that. And so I'd really like to talk about what are some of those adaptions that are needed to move into AI as a business practice.
Great, thank you. And next want to go to Mike Kanan. And Mike, same questions for you. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're leading with the Air Force and MIT. And if you were going to give us the one sentence tagline for how to shift this conversation toward mission readiness.
Thanks, Troy. And hi, everyone. I'm Mike Kanan. I'm the Director of Operations for the U.S. Air Force and MIT Artificial Intelligence Accelerator, and formerly the co-chair of AI for the Air Force at the Pentagon. The first period of work at the accelerator began in earnest of January 2020. So this is new. It's pursuant to a cooperative agreement with MIT to develop AI for a public good. And our partnership stretches across three main lines of effort. I believe this is very replicable, by the way, for each of our respective organizations. The first is we execute somewhere around 10 flagship AI projects and all the related work necessary to deploy and bridge and journey across the gap from R&D to implementation. The second is development of scalable AI education. And the third is to lead the dialogue in AI ethics and safety for the Air Force. The accelerator itself is the Air Force's first and only uniform unit dedicated to the advancement of AI, and it's strategically placed here at MIT as the world's centrifuge for advancements in this technology. What's important is it's specifically and thoughtfully manned with hand-picked officer and enlisted airmen subject matter experts throughout 9 different career fields from the Air Force. To date, over this difficult summer, we've published over 13 papers, released a public challenge for AI, and delivered a number of prototyping minimal viable products into the field so far. Its value is tangible and significant to close the gap in AI application in comparison to key nation state competitors. And there it is. That's that whole back to great power competition tagline. It's of course the one we use to highlight the why behind everything we do because it's true. But at a certain point in time, it's time to get beyond those words. And I'm certain that many feel that sentiment too, because it must come with the what and not using those words as a crutch. And that's why I'm so excited about these events with AFCEA, their track record with these conferences. These aren't monologues from on high with scripted Q&A, nor are they events filled with people recycling empty words. And I think we can say bravo to that. Interaction and education is what's important right now, because it reinvigorates the connections we need to better communicate the level of detail necessary to journey along the AI path. Whether that's internally to other groups or externally with non-traditional and traditional partners. And with regards to AI, which is what I focus on, It's the newest new. That is new ideas that necessitate new approaches, because the old ways of doing business or putting your head in the sand aren't going to move the ball down the field.
Mike, thank you for that. And I think you just, put several threads out there we're going to want to tug on here in a few minutes. And finally, I want to go to Mike Madsen. And Mike, same questions to you. Tell us a little bit about the work at DIU and tell us where you think we should focus today's conversation. You're on mute, Mike.
Thank you. This is my first video call since March. Just kidding. Of course, we've all lived that. This is our reality since March. So, Troy, first off, thanks for having me and DIU to this very important discussion. Always great to be part of the FCA events. DIU was started in 2015 by then Secretary of Defense Ash Carter. And I mention that because next week is our 5th anniversary. We'll be pushing out some things on our website. So if we're not there, check that out. So DIU was started as a way to accelerate commercial technology into DoD, and our mission has evolved to include things like transform the capabilities of the capacity of the department, as well as strengthen the national security innovation base. Don't worry about memorizing those. Anyone, I've taken the liberty of writing them down behind me so you can reference back to those. And we're centered around 5 tech focus areas: autonomy, human systems, commercial space, cybersecurity, and of course, AI/ML, technologies that are undergoing the greatest rate of change in the commercial sector that we want to leverage and bring that into DoD. And AI is particularly important as it helps accelerate that human-machine interface and help accelerate that decision-making capability. And kind of building on what Mike said, he's absolutely right. Business as usual is not going to work any longer. In the 60s, about 40% of global R&D was U.S. Defense Department related. Technologies of interest started with DoD and then worked their way to the commercial sector. Now, DoD's investment represents about 3% of the global R&D share, whereas the commercial sector represents about 70%. So all of those technologies of consequence, AI/ML certainly is one of those, and applications to robotics and other things, are all starting in the commercial sector. We need to figure out how to get them into the department much more quickly. Part of that is making DoD more of a sophisticated partner, and that's what DIU does. We lower barriers of entry to the defense marketplace, allowing the men and women to take advantage of those advancements in AI, as Mike pointed out. I agree with Mike also. We need to get past the great power competition, but we need to tip our hat to that is underpinning everything we do, and this great power, the tech race in that great power competition where we're doing quite a bit in mission readiness, and look forward to teasing out some of those things that we're doing and the discussion.
Great. Yeah, and I want to come back to to the great power and the big picture side of this. We're going to push that to the end because we can fall into that trap, as Mike mentioned, of talking about that and never getting to the practical and the operational. And I think maybe a place to start is with some of these places where AI really is being deployed to real mission needs, and where we can see the results on the ground. Because one of the challenges in government and in society writ large over the last few years is everyone talks about AI and machine learning, maybe without a sense of the difference between the two. But it's hard to translate that into the direct applications. And I know that each of you have pushed some projects out into the field. I wonder if we could just talk about a couple of those use cases, so when we talk about mission ready IT, people know some specifics of what we're talking about. And maybe Mike Madsen, if we can stay with you, can you talk about a few of the things that DIU's been pushing out? Yeah, you bet, absolutely. So in our AI portfolio, we have a handful of different kind of subset areas that we are working on. They're best described as mission forecasting and planning, anomaly detection, complex systems control, operational decision support, and critical infrastructure and information protection. And we'll get to that one at the very end there. But if you think about all of those subcategories in AI, there's 2 kind of foundational elements to those. One is the data. It's all about the data, ensuring that we have usable data for AI/ML. But it's also about increasing the speed of the
human-machine interface that I talked about before, using that as a tool to do the change analysis that AI/ML algorithms are really good at, and then allowing time for the human element, the decision-making, to do what the human brain is designed for. And so one area that we found particular success is the mission forecasting and planning. We've leveraged commercial technology to use AI for predictive maintenance. And the commercial sector has long been in this area, and not just the airline industry, but other industries that use very large, complex machines with many moving parts that failure of any part is catastrophic. So there's some parallels there. So we were able to work with an end user. It was actually a maintenance group commander who had a very low maintenance reliability rate for aircraft. I think it was a low mission capable rate. And he wanted us to help increase that. So what we did a prototype with a commercial company, very short amount of time, very modest amount of money, about $1.5 million. We were able to return results that showed a 30% reduction in unscheduled maintenance and increase in its maintenance reliability rate, which is pretty significant when you're talking about combat operations, warfighter support, even humanitarian efforts. And we've been able to scale that across multiple platforms and multiple services. So from our perspective, that's truly a transformative project. One other success story we had that's not necessarily mission related for DoD direct operations, but it's a different mission set for the department, which is the humanitarian assistance and disaster relief area. We have fielded something called XView 2, which is, again, it's change analysis. So again, it's analyzing large quantities of data to determine what the changes are, and then determine where to apply the resources for that. And we prototyped it during a hurricane, and in fact, it's being used right now in California to help with the wildfire situation that's occurring right now, to analyze, to give the change analysis, and then to quickly get the resources where they're needed for life-saving support.
Great, thank you. And Terrence, let me go to you, and then Mike Kanan will let you wrap up on the example front. Terrence, can you talk a little bit about the places where this is being really applied on the ground?
Sure, absolutely. You know, our story begins really with the big data revolution. As we began to see incredible amounts of new forms of data come into DIA, we had to take advantage of it. So the first thing is we used computer vision, machine learning, NLP-like technologies to mine that data, to get our heads around that information. And that was the first putting your toe in the water. I won't quite call that AI. It was data mining at scale. And we had to learn a lot about how we managed and dealt with this amount of data. And that really gave us the background to get started. After a while, we learned if we got our data into a good DevOps environment, if we trained it really, really well, that we ended up with a resultant data set that we could do powerful things with it, right? And as we're just talking about, the first thing you can do is that anomaly change detection, right? Patterns, enigmas, change. That's what intelligence analysis at its root is about. What's different from baseline? And so we began to learn that we could pick this up, and we could really pick this up in these new forms of data. Converting that into intelligence analysis took a while. The first machine learning-based analytic algorithm we wrote probably took 90 days, and it probably took another 2 years to field. Why, right? Well, we had to get the cultural adoption. We had to source it. We had to validate the training. We had to validate the algorithms. We had to validate the tradecraft that we were using here. We were, in a sense, doing something at scale that human beings would do. There was a trust factor. We have learned, especially in intelligence analysis, to accept human error. We have not learned to accept machine error. A great use case that I'll bring up very quickly and move along is in a pilot study, which I can talk about openly. We basically took computer-based, agent-based analysts, and we took human analysts. We gave them sets of data and said, can you do an identification? We put a ship out in the world and said, can you identify the location of the ship? Pretty quickly, both were able to do it. It wasn't too hard to find the ship. There was enough data in there. The second thing we did is began to look at the confidence in the process. The machine was rated, it had a lower confidence, even though it had a better statistical output. The humans were using more qualitative methodologies to get there. But then the second thing we did is we began to take some of those data sources away. So if I take the AISV, the beacon from the ship, away from you, could you still identify the location of the ship? And it turns out you could. And this is where I thought it was interesting as a practice. the assessment was the trust was still much far greater with the humans than the agents, even though the agents probably were doing a better statistical job as we did this. And that's kind of where we are the state of today. And my caution in all this is we're still in the middle of that transformation, right? So the machine assisted is the absolute way to think about this. The second part of this is it's very iterative. It takes us a long time to develop a sound algorithm to use for something as time-honored as intelligence analysis. And and that iteration, that process of adaptation as you build your AI is something I think is lost in the discussion as we look at amazing tools and capabilities.
Great, thank you. And Mike Kanan, let you sort of wrap up on some of the specific use cases. What are you seeing as the kind of proven applications so far?
AI is a little bit like the Fermi paradox. We look out into the universe, and the universe is big, and we say, well, where's all the aliens? Where's all the life? Where's all the AI? There must be some barriers. And we use these words just recently, trust, understanding, and that. So let's deem a couple premises when we're discovering the best use cases and where we've found the best use cases or bang for the buck per se. So when we're trying to understand AI to the point in which we can help cultivate trust from an almost instinctual distrust, the first to help build that within our sphere of control and to recognize is the term AI, automation, DevSecOps. Literally most tech terms are so overused, misunderstood, and broad to the point it's meaningless. So how do we address that? We ask that question as leaders. The second is recognizing the fact in the academic setting now that there is not even yet a shared or prevailing and clear and convincing notion of trust in general for humans. So these are the pieces that we have an uphill battle. If you don't address both of these, you won't have a workforce ready to experiment and harder yet, willing to adopt these things in everyday business. And I think adoption is the first step towards this esoteric topic of trust. So we have to experience with them. Yet most of the time we ask ourselves, and we choose problem sets that are unique in their own sense. We throw around the worlds, joint all domain command and control, an air battle management system, and these really austere use cases. When otherwise we should ask ourselves, where can we practice these techniques well? Because they're transferable. The same technique that's an anomaly detection algorithm that would work at, let's say, a local hospital to identify substance abuse or something to that effect, is the same technique just trained on a different data set that may work in intelligence and the like. So what we found is taking a step back and saying, number one, do I have an environment? If I had an AI algorithm right now, it was containerized and I'm ready to throw it out, and I know these are some tech terms, but if leaders don't understand these terms and we're backwards to begin with, if I threw that out into my workforce, do I even have an environment to land it? Do I have a way to journey along that? Generally, the answer is no, but we're still trying to pursue AI. The second is, do I have representative data of what I'm going after? Generally, the answer is no. And you should rethink that your procurement strategies or your agreements and key performance parameters and all of the underlying difficult, not fun stuff to do. Most recently, when we're speaking about data and deployment here at the accelerator, we focused on what are computer problems. And scoping in AI is 95% of the battle. The tech exists. So choosing what is a computer problem, and for us, that's this idea of puckboard, which is the way that pilots schedule themselves. And there's a human who almost sees into the matrix and has this capability to say, I know you have a dental appointment this week, but I also know you're behind on this certification. Let me tag you up with this person so we're back to being mission ready. That's a computer problem. So over the course of the past summer with the Tron team for the Air Force and the Chief Data Office for the Air Force, we've deployed out an optimization algorithm that helps work with that on a platform that I had mentioned before, an environment where you can deploy machine learning. And that's with 400 users across a couple wings as we speak for C-17s. Now on the data side, and reconnecting and learning from one another, we recently released the magnetic navigation data set. You can find this on a GitHub repository. We did this at JuliaCon here at MIT, and that is using the Earth's magnetosphere to identify GPS when GPS is otherwise denied. So you have position, navigation, and timing, measuring the respective sphere when GPS constellation might be shot down. And you can understand that if we lost GPS, our ATMs wouldn't work. So this is one of those AI for a public good things as well, right? And those are some of the ways that I like to think about, where do we deploy AI? Do I have representative data? And if I could tomorrow, do I even have a place to deploy it? And it's unlikely you do. Let's start there.
That environment question, I think, is a very good one. And not every organization is going to have that platform ready to go. But are those platforms readily accessible to DoD components? If, through existing government contracts, through partnering with other existing organizations, is this something where, given some of the enterprise cloud agreements that are either in place or in the works, that it is becoming easier to stand up that landing pad for AI, or is it something that really needs to be scoped out on a agency by agency basis?
The cloud conversation's a hairy one. You're not going to do AI without cloud, and we all just need to recognize that right now at any scalable level. So we have to make that a priority. But the second question is, do these platforms exist? We should ask ourselves, well, what kind of procurement strategy am I going after? We're talking about how commercial industry leads, and that's what Mike was talking about earlier. Yet I see us still, when we have commercial leading in this technology sphere, still operating, FAR Part 15 IDIQ contracts, when otherwise we should have a FAR Part 12 acquisition, so those commercial providers could give you that same technology. And I think this is really important in these inflection points to really dive deep and make these tactical choices, because the tactical choices today are the strategic decisions of tomorrow when it relates to tech decisions. And I would ask that we take a step back and say, do my strategies reflect a commercial future? And again, generally they don't.
Mike Madsen, I want to turn to you here. There's a lot of things you could pick up on there, and feel free to do so. But my question was about the available tools that Mike mentioned, and how to whether there's a place that we're kind of building that toolbox of these existing tools. And related to that is that use of commercial technology and looking to the insurance algorithm that has military use as opposed to the traditional DoD approach of doing it from scratch. So Mike Madsen, I'm curious if you want to bring the DIU perspective to a couple of these things.
And again, DIU, we leverage the dual use commercial technology. So we're looking fairly well developed technology on a technology readiness level of 6 to 9. So technology that's proven out with a commercial customer base already, that then through minor customization and prototyping, we can use it to solve a DoD problem. So already proven out. So I think kind of coming back to Mike's point on the environment, that's an absolute critical point. I think we're at an inflection point now where a lot of our acquisition is including those kind of considerations, ensuring that's, what we're requiring is modular and open so that we can plug and play other pieces to it. But that's a very important piece that we have to get after is ownership of that data, and make sure that DoD continues to own that data, even though the output from the algorithms there may be some proprietary issues there, but the data ownership and rights are very critical. One other piece we found as we went through our process, we initially started the prototyping on predictive maintenance that I described before on the E3 aircraft, very old 707 airframe, analog. A lot of the data was handwritten notes, et cetera. And so a big part of the prototyping was also structuring that data, cleansing that data. But then if you look at current acquisition activities now, most of the activities are buying things that are set up to collect a lot of data. The F-35, the JLTV, a lot of those next generation pieces of equipment are going to be set up that we should be able to leverage things like advancement in AI, ML much easier going forward.
And Troy, if I can two finger right here before I know you're going to go over to Terrence, I do want to highlight and celebrate the work being done by the Joint AI Center and their focus on the Joint Common Foundation, right? So to build the environment, we have to ask ourselves, do I have access to one of those? For us as users out there, to the Jake, that cannot come soon enough. But I would also highlight a shift that's happened. Unclassified does not necessarily mean unsecure. And we should think about that because that provides the lower barrier to entries to be using the tech that these commercial providers could give you and that our workforce and talent is learning right now.
I think that's a really good point. Thank you. Terrence, on the, we're going to go to data in a moment, but I wanted to make sure I gave you a chance to weigh in on the tools question about how to identify them, things that are already available, and the degree to which the sharing is happening or not happening in government right now.
Yeah, there's some great work going on, and collaboration with technology and development has happened inside and outside of government, and we've taken advantage of that. But it's led us back to this very critical debate, which is build versus buy. By nature, I'm a build guy. I want to get that code and I want to iterate on it and build it. That's just the nature. But we have to look at the long-term investment strategy, right? We're looking at a technology set that's going to be in a continuous improvement and continuous delivery cycle, right? How is that best supported? We have seen risk with open source software. We've seen open source investments die. We've seen problems in open source and being maintained. And while we love the GitHub effect that's happening in the world, we have concerns about that because we're supporting over a life cycle. The other side of that is we worry about scalability in procured technology. And here's the problem. We may scale to limits we don't know. And it challenges a lot of our existing procurement models, especially license-based software models, right? How do we build that scalability in for an uncertain future? We live in those two worlds, and we're constantly debating and constantly doing the value test and the due diligence against the acquisition of the technology. The tools are great. There's some areas I'd love to see improvement in, but you know, the ability to get started in this world, thanks to Jake and Air Force MIT partnerships and DIU and In-Q-Tel and all of our friends out there, DARPA, is fantastic, right? If you have an interest to get started, you have an availability, you have a workbench to get started on. The backplane, the IT infrastructure is there to get going. It's not there in all realms of DoD. It's not out at the edge where we're going to need to do some compute. We're still challenged by that, and there's great folks working on it. And by the way, industry has provided us great technology to support us there. So this is the paradigm we're in right now, and these are tough decisions to make. For Mars and DI specifically, we're bound by this concept of continuous improvement and delivery and this build versus buy challenge to support scalability.
Sorry, I had to get myself off of mute there. Before we sort of go to the data side, I want to build on the buy versus build and add share to that mix, because predictive maintenance is something that's happening in several places. We talked about with the F-35. I know the Navy developed their own for certain ship systems a couple years ago, and I believe there's one for the Stryker in the Army. Is there a framework or even an informal conversation going on in DoD to share these lessons learned, or to start to make the algorithms available so that we're not reinventing the wheel each time for what are fairly similar missions? And I throw that open to the group.
Just very quickly, I think, the first step is if you're working on a digital technology and you're not sharing your API, which by the way, half time we didn't even develop, quite some time ago. If you're not sharing that and you don't have one, or your program manager, or your airman, soldier, sailor, marine, or workforce doesn't know what you're saying there, then we're just wholly wrong to begin with. So there's step one. How do we, again, could we share if we had the world at our fingertips should be the first question. And then to a broader point on sharing is, are we speaking a common language? And I had mentioned earlier that defining, what is, and I'm going to use this word compliance, and it comes with some baggage. But again, could I share if I tried? That's why we celebrate so much. Let me know what your tech stack is. Let me know what you're developing on, because then I can do my own thing for my own mission and provide it back over. So for us, I had mentioned C-17, and maybe perhaps the Marines or the Navy might say, I don't have that plane, right? That's your plane. Why would I need your scheduling app? Because dynamic scheduling is something for everyone, right? So if we have that, you could use it in any of your lines of business. And that's what's different about this AI and software thing, is that it is transferable. Let's just make sure that it's possible, even if we had it right now.
Thanks. And Mike Madsen, anything you want to add there? I know the sharing and making the connections within DoD is sort of a core part of DIU's mission.
Yeah, you bet. A couple points there. And coming back to Terrence on the modernization, had a great point that we work with a lot of non-traditional companies. In fact, the statute that gives us the authority to move fast, use OTs, specifically calls out non-traditionals, but it also includes provisions to work with traditional military vendors, systems integrators, et cetera. And look, modernization in the Department of Defense is going to take all players. We're going to need the imaginative minds and the non-traditional, the agility there, but the scale-up capability that Terrence was talking about may come from a different sector. So it's important to understand that modernization is certainly going to take all players there. And then the other part on sharing, that's a big part of our work also. We recently stood up an internal organization in DIU that you could think of it as the two-way street of business development and sales. And it's not a direct one-for-one, but if you put it in commercial terms, that's probably closer, where we do the initial business development, identify the simply stated problem statement, go through the prototyping, successful prototype, then on to production. And then the sales part is we take that successful prototype and production and we take it to other services, agencies, where we think it might be a solution, just like Mike described with scheduling. Predictive maintenance is the same thing. When we initially took this to the Army, we articulated that we had a successful prototype for aircraft. Let's apply it to wheeled vehicles. So we applied it to the Bradley fighting vehicle, but that was not initially obvious. And so we do get that out and we try to share when we do have successful prototypes with the other services that we think have a similar problem that will solve.
Thank you. And all of you, but especially Mike Kanan and Terrence, sort of emphasized the data challenges of you can't move these projects forward if you don't have the available data. And Terrence, you talked a little bit about the need to do data mining at scale. I'm wondering if if there are tools or best practices that you would want to call out here for organizations of trying to assess whether they have the data or whether resources available to start to gather and engineer that data for good AI purposes.
Yeah, for us, our critical lessons learned is you have to build a strong data management culture. When we got into big data, we developed a DevSecOps around it. It's not exciting work. We have data scientists and great developers who handle this data every single day. The reason why is the data is always going to throw you errors. No matter where you're coming from, you're going to get anomalies in that data. If you learn how to handle it well, and turn it around, A, you build a better DevSecOps environment. B, your AI is at a better state to begin and run. Most of the algorithmic work, the machine learning work that we're doing is on that newer form of data that is in that well-managed setting, right? And we had to build and adopt that culture, and it cost us a lot of back-end money that a lot of folks didn't want to invest in. They didn't want to invest in this DevSecOps around data management because there appeared to be no output. There was no algorithm that came from that. Just today, it got to a better state. But that enabled us to launch into all of these other missions and enable the machine learning work that we're doing today. Without it, we couldn't do it. And when we look at our legacy data, we're still limited. We're still going to have to go in and use some of these tools for data mining, but we can't do the level of AI on legacy data that we could because the quality issues remain there. They're not in that same modernized management culture.
I would agree with everything Terrence just said. Naturally, with all that he's accomplished, data fuels the development of these technologies, and it requires a vast and diverse amount of representative data. And whether that's derived from authoritative source or generated through digitizing your daily workflows. We talked about legacy data. We should ask ourselves, is it even worth that squeeze? Is that juice worth the squeeze to work all that time when it might not even represent what the workforce is even up to right now and the hacks that they're using? So in order to train for this, for continuous delivery, which is what AI is all about, you should be principled on consistently generating training quality data. These are crucial words when we think about contracts, and we subsequently think, do I have access to that training quality data? Because for any of this to influence your operations, it should be provided and archived in this state. And data engineering for AI is totally different than, walking over with a hard drive to an engineer and saying, please make some AI with it. I've always found that data engineering, and it's always surprising, it ends up eating up maybe half the budget that I had even planned for the entire program. So just plan ahead for that. You're going to be surprised. But you should try and set policies and standards for that word training quality data in your contracts. And what you want to do is model, digitize, and instrument everyday business workflows.
And Mike Madsen, you talked about XView 2 earlier, and a lot of that is about preparing the data. Does that sort of fall into the same camp of replicable tools and that, or at least models that others can learn from?
Yeah, Troy, absolutely. In fact, XView 2 came out of a challenge that we held. So we were looking for others to be able to pull that in and then down select to find the best one. But we are absolutely looking for models to replicate and share to get the best value for that. But I couldn't agree more with Terrence and Mike as far as the data piece of it. And I think there's a certain element of this that's cultural also. And I think we're starting to see some of those changes now. Most agencies and organizations have now named a chief data officer. We're starting to see career fields like data architect, data manager. And eventually, I think the next iteration is going to be what does a career in the service as a data manager look like? Is it similar to a program manager, for example? And those kind of paths to start grooming folks who've spent a good part of their career in that data field, but also kind of fluctuating between the other operational aspects as well to understand the operations and then how to apply that data to all the technology tools that are emerging to satisfy some of those operational problems.
Right, and I think that's a very good transition into the people and culture side of this. And we've touched on in a few different points the lack of sophisticated understanding for people who aren't sort of doing this as their core job. There's obviously the talent challenge of finding true data and AI specialists in government. But I'm curious. We could do a whole session on the talent challenge. I want to focus on the leaders and the business owners side of this, and what is the education that's still needed? I mean, I think that Mike Kanan mentioned earlier that we shouldn't be talking about what is AI anymore. It's how do we use it properly, but that's still an education process. And Mike Madsen, maybe you can sort of start on this of what are the conversations that still need to be happening to get, it's not even buy-in, because it seems like most agencies are saying, go give me an AI initiative, even if they're not sure what they want the end result to be, but to get informed buy-in and that's going to lead to effective results.
Yeah, and I think some of this is generational, but you're right. I think we don't really need buy-in anymore. We need to continue the education on what exactly is AI. Mike mentioned the Jake before. Jack Shanahan recently departed as a director of the Jake, big brain, and he gave a great briefing on, he threw up a slide of the movie Ender's Game or iRobot, and his comment was, this is what everybody thinks AI is right now, the current state of it. And then he threw up a picture of Pong, and he said, no, this is really where we are, the very simplified 80s game. And I think a deeper understanding, continuing education piece to understand, this is going to be an iterative growing process, and it's not generating autonomous robotic beings, but rather the algorithms for increased decision-making speed or change analysis. So I think it's a big part of it is continued education, not only at the senior level, but again, as I talked about before, where we start generating these career fields where we develop professionals in those that then have a career of that background to bring that to the very senior levels.
Thanks. And Terrence, thoughts that you have on the proper educational conversation that we should be having right now?
Sorry, yes, so absolutely. First at the leadership level is redefining your agency to find this place where this level of risk of investment can occur, right? Traditionally, IT investment is based on security and risk, right? Especially in my world, that's the culture of IT infrastructure. And AI is a little different. As I mentioned, it's iterative, it's trial and error. So you have to get into a place and you have to create structure corporately that moves you into that area. And it's a way, a lot of what we do in intelligence analysis is based on standards and a regimented process so that we are performing assessment with the lowest amount of risk. And we're saying is take some risk over here, just offline, and work it back into your business culture. And finding and partnering with industry to learn how to do that is, I think, critical at the leadership level. Down in the workforce level, cultural adaptation is slow, right? We've spent at least 10 years now getting folks acculturated to big data, getting them used to automation, getting them used to their level of risk and comfortability with that, right? We basically say we have to replicate before we automate, right? We have to have them in the loop as we do this. And the thing that sells for us at that level is if I can convince you, give you one thing through AI, which is more time, right? If the machine assists you, you get the thing you desire the most, more time to do more analysis, right? So that's the big selling point. The adoption of data literacy and technology literacy in our workforce is slow and hard-earned, and we're still looking at better models to do that. I think what we're missing in all of this is the hub and spoke model, right? I think the hub is building with the Jake and with AIM at OD&I and other places like that, but I think we still want to develop those spokes. How do I get it out there as that critical intelligence shop that's sitting at the very edge of all of this, right? And we're still imagining ways to get there. And I think we're still iterating through what that model looks like.
Right. And Mike Kanan, wanted to give you sort of the final word on this topic, and both the right conversation to be having with leaders and if you're so inclined to also go back to your point about how do you make sure we're pursuing AI with the public good in mind.
Thanks. There are moments in our personal lives and our professional pursuits where it's time to look in the mirror. We each need to ask ourselves, when I use these words like machine learning and neural networks, and we should do an AI project, do I actually know what I'm saying? And that's important for all ages, all demographics. Right now, we are at that inflection point. And it's happened once before in our past as well, on October 4th, 1957, while the upstart Milwaukee Braves were playing the New York Yankees and Sputnik flew over, right? We've seen this moment. And we responded with an education campaign. We responded together to say, I need to learn about how this technology affects my life, and each of our lives, and we move forward together. For our workforces, we need to read more. Learning is a lifetime sport. When it comes to experience and leadership, you weren't doing this stuff after, before 2011, largely speaking, right? We'll say last AI winter, we come out of that 2011. The leaders today are probably about 30 years old. They have more experience than necessarily someone older in this sphere. So how do we tap the citizen coder? How do we tap the Bitcoin miner at home who are throughout the Air Force in each of our services and in each of our agencies? These are the questions to ask. The barriers to education have never been lower. Are we actually reading about it? And are we chatting about and understand the things we're espousing?
Well, Mike, I think it's a great place to leave this conversation today. There's clearly more learning that we all need to do and more discussions that gentlemen like you three need to help lead in the community. But I feel like today's conversation was a valuable contribution to that effort, and really appreciate all three of you taking part. So Terrence Bush, Mike Kanan and Mike Madsen, thank you very much for your participation today, and thanks all of you for watching and taking part in today's event. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you, Mr. Bush, Captain Kanan, and Mr. Madsen for speaking with us today. And thank you, Troy Schneider, for moderating. Thank you also to Amazon Web Services for sponsoring this breakout session. Thank you for attending our AI for Mission Readiness panel. We're going to take another short break before reconvening for our Chief Data Officer panel in 10 minutes. To return to the general session, select the General Session tab in the top right of your screen.